the focus here is on how water stewardship enables sustainable growth. And we're going to be looking at that through 4 case studies which bring evidence, particularly of the economic, but also social and environmental benefits of the stewardship approach. So I'm very pleased to welcome everyone to this session, and I hope it's going to be an exciting and interactive session. Now, this session is going to be recorded, so I just have to mention that if you don't want to be recorded, you'll have to probably leave this session. The recording will be made available after the session. And as we go across, I think as we go along, please turn your camera off. I don't think there's anyone that has it on at the moment, but and then also mute yourself, except when you're speaking. That's for the presenters. Now, here what we're going to be doing is we're going to be asking, we're going to go through these 4 presentations, and then we're going to have a question and answer session. So what we'll be asking people to do is to use the chat function. And that you can do by, if you look on the screen, you can see there's a little speech bubble there. If you press that, then you'll get up the meeting chat, and you'll be able to ask questions. And what will happen is that the presenters will then pick up on those questions, probably 2 for each presenter, and answer them at the end of the presentations when we have a question and answer session. So let's go on to the agenda. So this is our agenda. We're going to be looking at 10 minutes for each of these 4 different case studies. There's going to be one about the link of water stewardship and economic development. We're going to follow up that with the stewardship's contribution to water secure and economic cities, looking at Kampala and Lusaka. And then we're going to be looking at another aspect where we're building economic resilience in agricultural supply chains from Peru. And then finally, we'll be looking at embedding stewardship in economic zones and industrial parks across a number of countries in Africa, Ethiopia, South Africa, and Tanzania. And then after that, we'll have a question and answer session. So without further ado, I would ask for our first presenter, Vasilis, Dr. Vasilis, to talk on his subject and his case study. Vasily, please go ahead.
Thanks, Eric, for the very nice introduction, and thanks everyone for attending our session. What I'm trying to capture here is how we, in Natural Resources Stewardship Program, are working when linking water stewardship and economic development. A few things. I'm an advisor economist working for Nexus here in Espoo in Germany. And yep, one second. Yep. What is Nexus? Nexus is the global program of GIZ, Natural Resources Stewardship Program. We are enabling private, public, and civil society partnerships with the aim to sustain natural resources, and while at the same time we improve livelihoods and we support economic development. How we do that? We are acting as an honest broker, and we are trying to deal with the risks that governmental organizations, the public sector, private sector, and the civil society are facing: reputational risk, regulatory risk, physical risk. We have our own tool within this process of creating partnerships, the Natural Resources Risk and Action Framework that we are applying in 5 specific steps. And the aim of our work is to provide systemic change, to reduce these risks, and provide more opportunities for economic development and employment. So economic development is in the core of Nexus.
Muchas gracias, Manuel.
Which as a program has been the successor program of the International Water Stewardship Program, IWRM. Can you please turn off your microphone, somebody? Yes, thank you. So we are the successor program of International Water Stewardship Program that many of you, I guess, already are aware. But on the way, we realized that it's not only water, but very often we have interlinkages to other natural resources. So we expanded to natural resources stewardship, but we still continue the work that we were doing, and water still remains one of the core themes of our work. As I said, it is the successor program of IWSAIP, which IWSAIP had 38 partnerships with over 100 partners in the 8 countries that we were working with, more than 3.2 beneficiaries. And we managed to leverage private investments of more than 15 millions. About Nexus, as I said, the focus is on economic development, so jobs and investments is in the core of our work. We are aiming to create or secure about 70,000 jobs by the end of 22 and 225 millions of safeguarded investments. As you can see from our KPIs, we are on a good way, although these interruptions on our operation and the difficulties in the last months due to the COVID, but we are still on our way, and we see quite good that we can achieve these targets. Now, in the core of this presentation, and how do we link the economic growth with the water stewardship? This is something that we need as an aspect to better understand our water stewardship partnerships and interventions on the ground. It is a way to inform better decisions and policies. So this part of assessing welfare effects, growth, investments, jobs, and in this way, we also try to incorporate environmental and social impacts and the economic part of that. We have organized the work in Nexus around 4 core themes: resilient cities, special economic zones, circular economies, and resilient catchments. So in this case, we have several partnerships and actions and activities on the ground. And for example, we have the industrial parks in Tanzania, Ethiopia, and South Africa, where we see the linkage for economic development, or the water security action and investment plan in Kampala and Lusaka. That for both topics, our colleagues later on will present specifically how we work on that. But also on the other side, we have some quite developed macroeconomic modeling that we did in South Africa, and I'm going to present to you, but also another case study of extended cost-benefit analysis in Uganda. And starting with this economic model in South Africa to see how we introduce the economic impacts in the work that we are doing. We were requested by the partnership we had in Nelson Mandela Bay, but also from some partners at the national level, to bring an economic model to see which are the impacts of water insecurity, of water scarcity, or water security for the economy of South Africa or Nelson Mandela Bay. So we applied a general equilibrium model, which is a very mathematical approach model. It represents well the water sector on that, and it brings a systemic approach where we see how businesses, households, and government are interacting, and within this system we are bringing water. So on the one side, we bring into this model changes like water deficit, water supply issues like reuse, desalination, water pricing, or a policy mix. And then we try to see the effects on this system regarding the cost of inaction, household income, employment, inequalities, poverties. Within this economic modeling, we applied 5 different scenarios. For sure, what happens when we have water scarcity. This predicted 17% water scarcity by 2030 for South Africa, but also combining water scarcity with scenarios for decreasing non-revenue water, for increasing water pricing, water saving, and water reuse and desalination.
Another minute and a half for you.
Yes, I'm finishing. So in this case, we saw that in South Africa, we have a big cost for the GDP. If we don't do anything, about 0.92% of the national GDP will be lost. And on the other side, we see that if we invest in water saving, then we can reduce the negative cost and also produce more GDP and also produce more jobs. On the same side, in Nelson Mandela Bay, GDP will be reduced 0.82% by 2030, but if we apply water saving, increase water saving, then we see that GDP can increase 0.94%, and we can create also in this region almost 990 jobs. And then we also have other numbers for this study, overall numbers, the same economic modeling, but applying extended cost benefit analysis we did in Uganda in the Kiha partnership. And here we had two alternatives for introducing a better irrigation system and expanding production, but also protecting the wetlands. And here we saw that if we expand the production and bring more irrigation and protect wetlands, we can, in these two scenarios, produce 7,900 jobs in the first case and about 7,800 new jobs. Why are we doing that, and why we will continue doing that? It's because this is a very participatory approach, economic approach, because in both cases stakeholders decided on the design and the scenarios to analyze. We combine on that water and climate scenarios. We can further investigate vulnerability of households and ecosystems. It's an evidence-based approach for the economic impacts. We can apply, of course, this economic model, including more economic sectors like agriculture and energy. And then our aim is to upscale it to more countries, although there are several technical limitations and issues to consider when it is about budgeting and resources. So thank you, and with that, that was from my side.
Thank you very much, Vasily. I'll give you a clap here in a remote way. And you can see there's a couple of questions that are coming up on the chat for you there. So please alert yourself on those. And now I think we move over to Robin and Lydia to give us their presentation. We can't hear you. You need to turn off your mute.
Thank you so much. Robin Farrington, Country Coordinator for Natures in Zambia. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here and to be joined by you all. I hope you can see both me and the screen, presentation screen. Is that right? Yeah.
We can see both, and even better than that, we can see Lydia.
Fantastic. Okay, good. So I'm joined by Lydia Ngonzi, is the technical advisor from Natures in Uganda, and she will talk about the work in Kampala that we've done. So building on Vasily's presentation, we're here to talk about how a stewardship approach can contribute to more water secure cities, more economic resilient cities in Kampala and Lusaka. The rationale, part of the rationale behind this is that urban water security is incredibly complex, and the cities, many African cities, face multiple and growing water security threats. This is exacerbated by a lack of coordination between actors and a lack of a multi-sectoral approach, which is required to address this complexity. And also there's as Vasily was alluding to earlier, a limited evidence base to catalyze a common agenda, action, whether it's policy, political action or investment. And ultimately, there's in many cities, a disempowered and fragmented communities, and that results in weak accountability and governance. So in Kampala and Lusaka, we had what we called the Water Security Action and Investment Planning projects. And this was running between 2018 and 2020, co-funded by DFID, Cities and Infrastructure for Growth Programme, and delivered through the BMZ GIZ Natures Programme. So in this presentation, we really want to focus on how the stewardship approach, the multi-stakeholder stewardship approach can support integrated planning and solutions development, and how improved evidence base, information management and empowerment have strengthened already the engagement of different actors, strategy around water secure cities and governance overall. So I'll hand over to Lydia now.
Thanks, Robin. So for the example of Kampala. So we're looking at Greater Kampala Metropolitan area. And this is right now regarded as Uganda's economic engine, as it provides nearly 65% of Uganda's non-agricultural GDP. The challenge that this area faces has to do more with growing population. As we can see, we have more than 4.5 million people. And right now, the urbanization rate in the area is one of the highest in the world. So for us, as far as the water security investment plan is concerned, we were wondering, how do you balance economic growth and at the same time ensure that environmental assets are well safeguarded to continue to provide the kind of services that they provide for a growing city and metropolitan area? Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
I think on my screen. Hopefully it's coming.
Okay, thank you. So as Robin mentioned, this is a multi-stakeholder. How do we come up with a multi-stakeholder owned plan that would guide stakeholders to achieve both economic growth and at the same time ensure that environmental resources are safeguarded? So for the case of Greater Kampala, we came up with a collaboration, a multi-stakeholder approach that relies on the stewardship approach, where we brought together different stakeholders from the Ministry of Water, Kampala Capital City Authority, National Water and Sewerage Corporation, and the Uganda Manufacturers Association. These stakeholders came together with support from the Uganda Water and Sanitation Network and the Uganda Environment and Natural Resources CSO Network to come up with a multi-stakeholder owned plan. So the plan was built on the structures of the Kampala Pollution Task Force, which is already an existing multi-stakeholder platform that was addressing pollution issues only. And so we sought, how do we expand this platform to address all other issues that are related to economic growth and environmental assets? The WSAIP was more of a demonstration project. How do we demonstrate that actually the Kampala Pollution Task Force can evolve to address issues that face 4.5 million people within Kampala and Greater Kampala at large? So throughout our process, we tried to harmonize the coordination process. And so in this case, we found that we had a project that was led by more than 5 stakeholders, key government stakeholders, plus the private sector, the Uganda Manufacturers Association, as well as the CSO network. Secondly, we demonstrated that the Kampala Pollution Task Force can actually evolve and grow to address issues that go beyond pollution and to be able to achieve common goals for different stakeholders, including the private sector. Throughout the process, we also managed to initiate a Kampala PET plastics recycling partnership that is covering the whole of Greater Kampala right now and is still steered by a multi-stakeholder platform. Another achievement that we're able to gain throughout the process, that we're able to bring more than 300 private sector industrialists to be part of this process. They were able to identify water security risks facing industries and also come up with solutions that would be able to address those risks. So together as a team of more than 1,500 stakeholders, we were able to come up with a multi-stakeholder owned plan that would enable stakeholders to move forward. So what kind of evidence did we need then to steer a way forward on how to address the water security risks that face Greater Kampala? One of the type of evidences that we needed was to show that if we did invest in water security challenges would actually contribute to economic growth. This kind of evidence is needed particularly by the Ministry of Finance, in order to provide budgets and financial resources to invest in water resources. We found that if we did actually go ahead and invest in water security, we would improve GDP per capita for every Ugandan, for the 4.5 million people in Greater Kampala, by $195. Interestingly, though, we also found that if we did invest in Greater Kampala, we would increase GDP per capita for all Ugandans in the country, given that Greater Kampala is the economic engine of Uganda, by $52. The interesting part of the study also found that the investment costs, the benefits that we would receive from investing in water security in Greater Kampala are 8 times more than the amount of money that we would need to invest. So this was key in presenting that actually investing in water security would steer economic development in Greater Kampala metropolitan area.
Lida, we just have one minute left.
Yes.
So I think probably we just focus on Kampala, maybe not so much the Zambia one.
Yes, please. So to conclude this study, we found that we've generated a scenario planning tool that stakeholders are able to see that if they did invest in different intervention actions, they would actually bring about different benefits. So we have a scenario planning tool and a water security investment model that enables stakeholders to first of all identify this type of interventions and to scale them in selected areas of implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leah. It's a very, very interesting discussion. I can see there's a couple of questions already come up from Nick and also from Colin Heron, really looking at building on the evidence base for whether stewardship works or not. So continuing in that vein, I think we now invite Adrian Sim from the AWS. Adrian, please, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Let me just pull up my presentation. How's that? Is that working?
That's working.
Okay, magic. Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute to this discussion today. My name is Adrian Sim, and I'm got the privilege of being Chief Executive and leading the Alliance for Water Stewardship. My presentation today is going to focus on agriculture, of course, a sector that accounts for the majority of water use worldwide, and a sector on which many millions of livelihoods depend. Specifically, I'm going to take you on a journey that we've been part of in Ica, which is an agricultural producing region of Peru. Producing a lot of high value export crops like avocados, table grapes, asparagus, etc. So first of all, just a little bit about the Alliance that I as I said, have the privilege of being Chief Executive of. The AWS is a member-based association. Our members come from a variety of different sectors from all around the world. I've put up the logos of a cross-section of our members here just to give you a flavour of the diversity of perspectives and expertise that our members bring. And to emphasise that multi-stakeholder participation provides the foundation for not just AWS as an organisation, but also for our definition of water stewardship. And this builds very consistently on the messages that Robin and Lydia and Vasily have been giving so far. Our members unite, therefore, behind a definition of water stewardship rooted in multi-stakeholder participation, which is expressed through the International Water Stewardship Standard, or the AWS standard as it's commonly termed. This is a voluntary standard which is applied at a site level. It is a globally consistent standard. It can be applied in any context and therefore needs to be able to respond to that context while achieving 5 core outcomes of good water governance, sustainable water balance, good water quality, the status of what we term important water related areas, and access to safe water sanitation and hygiene for all. So users of this standard get to understand their water use in more granular terms than they probably would have done without it, to understand the risks and dependencies of that water use, the impact they have on others and others have on them, and then to work towards common goals at the scale of a catchment. The standard comes with certification as an option through which independently sites can gain independent certification and thereby gain recognition as having met the standard and make credible claims on their water stewardship performance. The uptake of the standard so far, just to give you a bit of a sense of how widely it's being applied, you can see from this graph, there's around in excess of 200 sites around the world which are either currently certified or in the process of getting certification. A good geographical spread. All world regions are represented here. What's not represented here is the range of sectors in which the standard is being applied, and that again is very diverse. Everything from microelectronics to textiles to food and beverage to the subject of today's conversation, which is agriculture. And so to Ica. Ica is a region of Peru, a coastal region, a very arid region. You can see from the statistics here that it, on average, receives only 8 millimeters of rainfall a year, which is, I think, significantly less than we've received this morning here in Scotland. And a combination of factors have enabled Ica to become a significant agricultural producing region. Most of that production is geared for exports. The kind of high value export crops that I mentioned before, driven by market demand in Europe and in North America, but also increasingly from Asia. This has brought with it a lot of prosperity. It's brought jobs. It's brought economic growth that means Ica compares favorably in comparison to other regions of Peru in terms of economic indicators. However, it comes with risks. Water is the risk factor for the sustainability or future prosperity of the agricultural export sector there, and that in turn means that it's the critical factor for the communities that depend on that industry for their livelihoods. It's also been the subject of a number of reports, some really rather negative publicity about the impacts of water use on these agricultural supply chains. These stretch back a number of years, such reports, emphasizing not just the sustainability of water use in Ica itself, but also how that relates to upstream communities through the demand for access to water within Ica, how that's affecting upstream communities, or the ability of communities within Ica itself to access safe water, sanitation and hygiene, and how that's impacting their rights. So our approach is one which is constructive and is based on constructive engagement. We believe that the standard can and should be able to address many of the concerns that were highlighted in such reports, but to do so in a way which builds confidence and trust across the various stakeholders, and really enables, in this case, in the case of Ica, enables the producers to go from being on the back foot, from being in a defensive position, having been criticised by various reports where by nature everybody's categorised the same, whether you're performing well or not, to enabling them to be on the front foot and be open to change and to be able to demonstrate leadership. We started off with a project funded by SECO several years ago, the Swiss agency SECO, looking at the competitiveness of the agro-export sector in Peru as a whole. We're now working with partners FMO, DEG, and EDICA and WWF to embed this approach, and there's a strong focus on Ica. and what we're able to see is that momentum is being built. More producers, more stakeholders are paying attention, and crucially, there's more participation also from the public sector within this approach. And I really can't stress strongly enough the importance of process in ensuring a safe place in which leadership can flourish, and that's what I think we've been able to support in ICA. ICA is highly contested, as you'll have gathered from the reports that I referenced before. But by building an approach that addresses the concerns that are spelled out in these various reports, but ensuring that producers feel that we've got their back, then we've quickly been able to move to a position where 6 major producers have made a commitment to the transparency and the scrutiny that the AWS standard requires. And it's important that to recognise that for a supermarket, risk in their supply chains might be the key factor for them engaging in water stewardship. For an investment bank, it might be risk in your investment portfolio. They're looking at that from a risk angle. But for producers locally, the biggest risk of all might be actually taking action, taking that leadership, because that opens you up to scrutiny, it opens you up to criticism. And so I'd really just like to pause for a second here and recognise the 6 individuals that you see on the photograph here are the chief executives of the 6 companies at the bottom of the slide who have made that commitment, and that takes a lot of courage, that kind of leadership. And that leadership another minute, Adrian. Yep, that leadership also inspires others to come on board. We've signed MOUs with the Groundwater Board in ICA, the Chamber of Commerce for the region, the Peruvian Agro-Exporters Association, and just recently, a couple of weeks ago, with SUNAS, which is the water service, the regulator of water service providers in Peru. Part of that is a plan to implement the standard in one of the municipalities in ICA, which will help to embed the stewardship approach in the region. And also serve as an example that we hope we'll certainly learn a lot from it, because it's never been done before, but we'll be able to take that learning and who knows, be able to replicate it at other municipalities elsewhere in ICA in Peru, and why not internationally. So specifically, I'll just skip on to the last slide, just to say that the lesson so far is that and I'm emphasising so far because we are at still a stage in a process, an ongoing process, and that is that criticism is good and important, but for it to drive change, it needs to be accompanied by support and incentives to make that change, and that's what our standard system is designed to achieve. And also, it's designed to enable the safe place that local leadership can flourish, and that's essential. If it's going to have any kind of lasting impact, we need to be able to stimulate that local leadership, and for that to build momentum, and for us to be able to use that momentum as everybody involved to use that momentum, as we've been doing with the various organisations I've mentioned in this presentation so far, to really follow the heat and build traction and make more people part of this journey. And so exciting times ahead. I think we've achieved a lot, but there's a lot more to be achieved, and I'm very optimistic about how this is all progressing. So with that, thank you very much.
Yes, thanks a lot, Adrian. And Adrian was actually addressing there some of the things that came up in the questions, namely the policy incentives for the private sector, and also accountability. So you can see questions appearing on the chat line. Please continue with that. Without further ado, we invite Dr. Faith from South Africa to talk to us about the economic zones and the appliance of stewardship in those areas. We can see your presentation, Faith, so please go ahead.
Hi everybody. Thank you for that, Eric. I'm going to be talking to you about sustainable economic development in economic zones and industrial parks, and we're going to look at how we've addressed as a program natural resource challenges across 3 of our sites. As a start, the program identified a key challenge and an opportunity with regard to working on economic zones and industrial parks. African economies, as we know, are transforming and innovating, and with the huge impetus to boost economic development and industrial strategies, there's been a very strong need to not only address unemployment challenges, but also look at the potential areas where significant employment and investment opportunities could come about. We have also recognized that the whole call for green recovery, especially post-COVID, and the impact it has on economies and sustainable development has got a strong, has meant that there's a very strong call for specific action around this. And finally, as Natures, we also realized that coming up with a particular response around resilience in economic zones could potentially allow the program to have some kind of response and action in relation to that. So we're focusing on resilient economic zones by addressing a number of different challenges, the whole area around provision of environmental services in special economic zones and industrial parks, and looking at how we basically address the challenge of water, which is not adequately addressed in many of those contexts. We also look at the whole area of addressing the regulatory clarity within an industrial park. And of course, we recognize that there's a lot of work around the whole eco-industrial park focus and sustainable industrial area focus for industrial development in developing countries. But recognizing the great work that's been done, in some instances, the links between national development plans is not necessarily fully addressed. And then finally, the whole area around WASH, looking at the areas relating to not only a healthy workforce at site, but also looking at the considerations from the communities where workers are coming from as well. So in addressing some of these challenges, the program is focusing on looking at water and natural resource risks in relation to this. We're trying to address the issues around water demand at economic zones and site level, and looking at greater clarity in terms of the interrelationship between this. And also the whole area around local economic development and the link between LED and the promotion of ecological health, and how that manifests itself in how we plan and support economic development at site level. With regard to the priority actions, the program has identified 4 strategic program priority areas that will allow us to address these changes which we are promoting. At the core, it's about applying the AWS standard within economic zones and industrial parks. It's also about articulating greater clarity in terms of guidelines and standard operating procedures for actors within the park, but also in terms of how the park has been managed. It's also about improving operational efficiency of water use and other natural resources. And of course, engaging with industries around CSI, especially as it relates to the living conditions of workers who are based in site. So we've given expression to that at 3 levels, at company site level, where we're looking at promoting the standard and looking at beyond the fence line activities. We're looking at working at city level in terms of our city or economic zone level, where we're looking at applying work to a particular zone context or industrial park context, whether it's looking at efficient resource use or working on the topic of wastewater treatment or systems change around how water is managed or the regulatory context within which it finds itself. And building on that, we focus on contributing to national guidelines and procedures and processes in support of a broader institutional impact in terms of the work we're doing around that. For us, also knowing that we're working at different levels in different countries, the whole inter-country learning and making sure that we have learning across countries is very strongly embedded in our approach as a program. I'm going to now talk to you about 3 examples of how how we give expression to our approach as a program to the whole theme of industrial parks and economic zones. In South Africa, we focus very much at the national level, where we're looking at intergovernmental relations and looking at really embedding a multi-level approach to the whole theme of industrial parks and economic zones, and advancing resource use efficiency in that context. We work very strongly with the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition and the unit that deals specifically with industrial parks in developing a national standards operating procedures for industrial parks, where we're looking at the water-specific theme within that SOPs, which is really aimed at guiding and supporting the implementation of greater standards and adherence to standards based on the AWS principles in terms of how these parks are managed and run. We're supporting the development of a toolbox, and of course the whole awareness raising around and capacity building around resource use efficiency, and of course the AWS standard in particular. We're also looking at how do we take that into a sort of a more deeper dive context, where we support a site level work, where we're looking at an example in the Western Cape, and very much looking at how do we support a municipal, the relationship between an economic zone and the city context within which it finds itself, and looking at how do we ensure those linkages in terms of its own operating context, but also the regulatory context within which it finds itself with regard to management of water and waste as well. And of course, the relationship between the site and the catchment is quite important. We're doing this work.
Faith, there's another minute or so. You may have to drop one of the examples, perhaps.
Okay, I just want to quickly, in Tanzania, we're working specifically on wastewater treatment, and there's a very strong partnership with the Export Zone Authority. There, the work is very specifically around the development of national guidelines, which is endorsed by the Bureau of Standards in Tanzania, and it's really about putting in place not only an implementation support strategy around wastewater treatment, but also around looking at practical support around knowledge management, data management, and supporting a company-based approach to applying these wastewater discharge guidelines at site level. We have, of course, I know I don't have any time, but there's significant work going on in Ethiopia, which has been driven together with the Water Witness team and the GIZ team. Very strong focus on building capacity around stewardship, but also looking at giving support to the implementation plan in a industrial park in Hawassa, Lake Hawassa. So there's a lot of focus on safeguarding jobs and investment through the lens of stewardship. Maybe just to conclude 2 or 3 high-level comments. For us, it's really a very strong focus on job creation and investment promotion within the context of an industrial park and an economic zone. We have strong complementarities with the Eco-Industrial Park Framework of UNIDO, GIZ, and World Bank. And I think for us, bringing the how to that conversation is quite important. Early indications show that the implication of AWS standard is an effective mechanism for embedding sustainable water management. And of course, for us, really looking at emerging technical and process lessons are being translated into national policy guidelines. And for us, that is already a very good a lesson and starting point for the work that we need to do going forward. Thanks for that.
Great, thanks a lot. Thanks very much, Faith. That's excellent. So please, everyone, if you have questions on this and other presentations, please feel free to put them up on the chat line. But otherwise, I think what we'll do is we'll turn to Vasily to maybe pick a couple of the questions that he felt was most relevant. Just tell us what the question is, and then a very quick answer, and then we'll move on to Robin and Lydia and the others.
Thanks, Eric. I will pick up 2 very interesting questions. One about what method we are using for measuring jobs creation or retention, and what is the experience of that. Actually, what we are doing is we have our own monitoring system where we are using multipliers to estimate the jobs effects regarding new jobs or safeguarded jobs, and yearly we are updating our KPIs with questionnaires and surveys that we are doing to partners where we are working the partnerships specifically from the private sector. But besides that, we are when we consider that it's very interesting and very reasonable, we are applying economic models like what we saw in the presentation that I presented with this computable general equilibrium model, where this is much more precise than the multipliers, but of course it's much more expensive. But when we are talking about macroeconomic effects and jobs, then we have, yes, we can keep our hands on more detailed approaches and economic modeling, and we are always very happy to do that. The other very interesting question is how economic growth could become an obstacle to achieve water stewardship, and how would we deal with this? Actually, yeah, if the aim is only economic growth without checking into sustainability issues and the whole environment, the political context, the institutional context, the cooperation, the regulation is about economic growth, of course, then we don't expect to see water stewardship working well. But actually, the real question here is reversed. Can water stewardship become a motivation, a driver for economic growth? And this is for sure something that we can say from our experience and from the partnerships, that for sure water stewardship can promote economic growth. But not only economic growth, but sustainable economic development, because stewardship means that we are bringing sustainability in the operation of private sector that is collaborating in the partnerships, the public sector. So it's a completely different logic of cooperating. And as we said, the aim here is sustainability. It's not just economic growth. Economic growth can also be an effect of that, which is also important. But on the core of our work is also sustainability. What happens with natural resources? What happens with communities and societies? So I think for me, the most important is reversing this question. And from our experience, we see that, yes, for sure, there is a strong link.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Vasily. Very succinct answers. So maybe we move on to Lydia and Robin. Maybe you could pick one or two questions that you feel you'd like to respond to and give us a brief response.
Thank you, Eric. Well, unfortunately, we got cut a bit short, so we didn't hear the Zambia example, but there was a lot of community empowerment work there. So I was taking the question from Nick, I'm guessing Nick Hepworth, and it's around how has stewardship linked to accountability agendas, and what have we done to empower communities, and how has this led to stronger accountability? So actually, first and foremost, the approach we took in Zambia, at the heart of it was a human rights-based approach, looking at duty bearers, rights holders, and the linkage between them, and how we could actually work within the government structures to actually develop ward development committees. So we took a very much non-water sector approach, looking at area-based solutions and area-based integrated planning with ward development committees. So we helped to develop 12 ward development committees, get them elected, trained, zonal representatives. We helped support them through the city council. We trained all 33 councillors throughout Lusaka, 50 staff, 460 community facilitators, and help them to actually get forward the first local area plans in Zambia. So these are urban local area integrated development plans. It's part of the overall integrated development plan for Lusaka. So, and in doing that, we've also set up accountability mechanisms with the Lusaka City Council to help communities air their grievances and put forward their demands and concerns. So that's really developing long-term sustainable structures that are embedded in law already and but hadn't yet been realised. So an important part of the work when you're asking about successes was to actually help unblock a moratorium on the development of our WDCs. So through this work we helped to do that, and then the ward development committees could be developed. Now I think one of the big lessons learned was that with empowerment as different to engagement, empowerment, you have to take communities from where they are and help them on their empowerment journey. You can't just say, oh, we're doing a water project, you need to engage and you know, run through some motions. You actually have to see where the communities are and what their priorities are. And a lot of their priorities are actually crime, unemployment, solid waste, lighting, for example. So there are areas there that cross over with water security somehow. If you don't sort out crime, then people won't use common toilets, for example. So there's a lot of interlinkages, and you have to look way beyond the water sector to achieve that. So I think one of the biggest successes is that LCC are now adopting a human rights-based approach in there as they move forward with integrated urban development. One of the biggest challenges is supporting communities onward with their journey, when most donors, most actors take a project-based approach and really sort of stop at the end of the project. How do we take them onward on their community development and empowerment journey? Thank you.
Thanks. Any comments from yourself, Lydia?
So I wanted, there is one to do with how are we linking the work that we are doing with the SDGs, but I wanted maybe Robin would kind of show our slide on the lessons learned and try to put more focus there. To just show those lessons and speak through them, other lessons that we've learned. How have we, for Uganda, how have we aligned our work with the SDG reporting? So for Uganda, we have actually aligned everything we've done in the WSAIP planning process with the National Development Plan. So every 5 years, Uganda releases a National Development Plan that has different actions and programs. So we've made sure that the WSAIP, the Water Security Investment Plan, aligns to the National Development Plan. The National Development Plan is then aligned to the SDG reporting process. So along the way, we make sure that whatever we deliver feeds into the National Development Plan and ultimately feeds into achieving the SDG targets set by the country. Thank you.
I think that's really important, Lydia, isn't it? So it's deprojectized. The water stewardship becomes a movement, becomes something that is integrated in the functions of government and the country, yes, rather than just being a project that comes in and comes out. I think that's a really good point. So why don't thanks for that, and then I think we would ask Adrian. There's a batch of questions for you. Maybe you could pick the two that you feel most relevant, and we'll carry on.
Sure. One was around coverage and barriers to adopting stewardship in agriculture. I mean, the coverage in theory is global. As I said, our standard is applicable anywhere in the world. But of course, we need the kind of leadership that I've been referring to here to stimulate growth. Key in that is sharing experiences. So the more experiences we can share, the more lessons we can collectively learn. We should see greater participation in that sense. We also need to make it easier for smaller groups to access stewardship. Different ways in which we're doing that. Looking at ways of bringing down the cost of certification, working with other standard systems, in particular Global GAP, to make it a more seamless transition from Global GAP towards stewardship, and developing some ag-specific guidance for the standard, which is going to be launched very soon. There were also some questions around equality, from similar questions for a number of sources, and an interesting exchange going on between Nick and Manuel. There was a really strong reason why I emphasised process and was really emphasising this was a stage in a journey, and that's because the water stewardship or the AWS standard is not the answer to all of the issues anywhere in the world. We can play a contribution, and probably the most important contribution in that is bringing people together, and it's through bringing people together that around a framework that people are aligned behind that can enable us to work through some of the power asymmetries that lie at the heart of really almost all of our water related problems and societal problems, environmental problems. That's a really important contribution that stakeholder endorsed processes like ours have to make. But it's not something you do and then it's done, you know. So I explicitly avoided using the word success or anything like that. What we're really participating in is a process and trying to sort of move things in a constructive way. And yes, to the next question on impact measurement, we're not there yet in terms of measuring the impact of work in ICA or anywhere else. For a standard system like ours to talk credibly about impact, we need at least 5 years of credible evidence. We don't have that yet, so that's to come. There's mechanisms being put in place, and I very much hope we do get an in-depth, independent study of the work which is going on in ICA. I think everybody would benefit from that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Adrian. Faith, you had the last 5 minutes.
So there weren't any explicit questions to me, but maybe just 2 comments. I mean, I think what our experience has shown as Nature's in all the countries where we're working is that there's a very strong interest between the work we're doing in the industrial park and the relationship between the industrial park and the economic zone and the broader city planning operating context within which we find ourselves. And for us, that's been quite an interesting area of conversation that we've had to navigate in the different countries where we're working on this topic. And more we've seen, for example, in South Africa, we've seen a stronger awareness of stewardship at an industrial park context, but also a stronger pull towards how do we look at how we manage the park, how we look at the systems within it in relation to the broader context within which tenants within the park find themselves, but also in which the park itself is located, given the water source areas that feed it as well. So for us, it's really been a very interesting journey, and through the work that we're doing in the different countries, we're trying to build different cases, for example, around Lake Awassa and the excellent work that's going on through the stewardship initiative that's taking place in that industrial park around awareness raising, getting the standards right, but also solidifying the work through a stewardship plan. In Tanzania, we're looking at the strong collaboration with the Export Processing Zone Authority and really trying to not only develop guidelines around wastewater treatment, but also try and implement it and test it with the support of different instruments. And for example, I think it's the Chuka garment industry is now piloting those guidelines at site level. So I think as a whole, the program is really contributing to greater learning around the implementation of stewardship in an industrial park and in economic zone context, and we're very much looking forward to sharing that learning with you as we progress in our stewardship journey in that context. So yeah, that's all from me.
Great, thanks Faith. I think we're sort of kind of wrapping up. Robin, you had just a little point you wanted to make about data. Could you do that in half a minute?
Yes, I can. It's basically wanting to show that we in Zambia, we recognise that data is a massive issue. We did a synopsis of 153 reports linking to water security in Lusaka, and we've developed story maps where these things are actually unpacked into more simplified information. Now, it's not simple for Joe Public, but it's more simple for decision makers to understand. So here on the screen, you see an example of these story maps, where it breaks it down so people don't have to trawl through long reports. It's more like a website. And then on the right, you see a GIS-based system where you can actually plot, for example, cholera cases, boreholes from Lusaka water, 85% of water use in the city's groundwater. You can put groundwater direction, etc., contours and so on there. So you actually start to help planners make decisions based on where groundwater is flowing, what's polluting it, etc. So that's just a quick example of how we can deal with the complexity for decision makers.
Great, thanks a lot, Robin. I think there's still sort of other questions and things that are arising, but I think we more or less got to wrap it up now. There seems to be two words that this session has pointed to. One is process. So thinking of water stewardship not just as a project, but as a process which engage governments, as Lydia mentioned, but also the private sector and the private sector interests, as Adrian and others have mentioned. That's the one word, process, and the other one is the evidence base. The evidence base leading to learning, but also leading to accountability. And I think that this event has built upon that evidence base, but as mentioned by some speakers, that's a longer journey, which we still need to continue with. So I think with this, we're now at our time limit. Let's thank everyone for their participation. Let's thank the presenters and the organizers of this session, and also all those that have engaged with the questions. So thank you very much, and I think now we'll close the session.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye.